Greetings. This is Brother Jumoke Fetayo, your host of Reparations Now podcast. I think I have to come up with some different synonyms because I always say I'm excited about the guest today, and I am truly excited about the guest today, which is Elder Pioneer Sister Attorney Adjoa Aiyetoro. We started a sub-series, I call it, within the Reparations Now podcast called Conversations with Our Elders, because we feel like it is so important to get their stories documented and get their stories down. And so we added that as a special component. So we continue to do the reparations, different topics in the reparation movement, but we also specifically are reaching out to the elders and making sure that we get their stories and get them on the Reparations Now podcast. And Sister Adjoa is one of those people who I feel fit that category. She's been a long time in the trenches working on reparations. And before we do that, we'd just like for you to take a minute to like and subscribe to our show, leave comments, and we would very much appreciate that. It also gives you an opportunity to stay in touch with our show and find out when the next episode is coming up. So, Sister Adjoa Aiyetoro, we can bring her on now. And the way we usually start this is I don't usually read a bio. I ask people, what is it that you feel like people should know about you? And how did you come into the reparations movement? And you can take time and tell that story because that's the whole purpose.
Okay. Well, first of all, that's an easy way of you not having to do my bio. But what do I want people to know? Well, I born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Activist family in the sense of civil rights, civil liberties type things. So I have in my bones, so to speak, a family, a legacy of people being involved in the community. My great grandmother was a co-founder of the Phyllis Wheatley Y and worked with others to open a Black tennis court so Black people can play in South St. Louis. So my mother was on the Urban League, Father was very much community involved, that kind of thing. So that's my background is, I guess I have it in my blood to be involved in community, be concerned about community, and to work for community. I guess I'm the furthest, I know I'm probably the furthest left in my family, of people that I know of in my family. But I know that they all are concerned about, or we're concerned about our community and its advancement and defense of it. I really got involved with the reparations movement. I think that was the next question. I really got involved with the reparations movement when I was walking back on Pennsylvania Avenue, walking back from lunch to my office. I'm an attorney, and I worked, my first job out of law school was with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And ANRO, African National Reparations Organization, had a poster up on the by the building where I was going to, and it said, had a picture of Uncle Sam pointing out, that typical Uncle Sam with the tall hat and all of that striped jacket, saying, Black folks, the U.S. government owes you so many trillions of dollars. And I resonated with that immediately. I said, yes. And after that, with I've been involved in the movement. I reached out. I think I already knew Nkechi, or I can't remember exactly how I connected, but I got, met with Nkechi, got involved with her. She says I'm her legal mentor because she worked at the National Prison Project. After she graduated from law school, she came to the National Prison Project. And so she says I'm her mentor in the law, and she's my mentor in reparations. And that was back in the early to mid 80s. And it just went from there.
Okay. So I wanted just to pick up, and I don't know how much you are able to share, but just wanted to learn a little bit more about ANRO. I've heard about ANRO from elders, but I don't know that much about it. I know Dorothy Benton Lewis was active with that. Queen Mother Dorothy Benton Lewis was active with ANRO. So did you work with ANRO anyway before in Cobra? We're gonna come to in Cobra in a minute. But did you work?
Not really. I didn't work with them. I mean, I met some of them when we get to the HR 40. They were participated in the session we had at this community center. I think it was on 18th Street near Columbia Road, in that area of DC. And we had a meeting to look at. John Conyers was proposing a reparations bill, and he had his what's his, I blanking on the guy's name now, who was Cedric, brought it and presented it at this meeting, and John Conyers asked us to organize it in Cobra. And Anra was there. We can talk about that. People were very disappointed, and I may be jumping ahead of where you want to go. And Anro was really very actively disappointed, and actually security had to intervene to calm them down, and not in any physical way, but just, and I think we actually had to escort them out. That's my memory, but I don't really know them. I just know of them. They did work around reparations. They were very committed. They're part of Yesatella's group.
Right.
They were part of that group, the
Uru movement. Okay.
They were part of that, but they I don't know how long they've been dissolved, but they no longer are active to my knowledge.
Yes, and ANRO stand for African National Reparations Organization. Yes. Okay. Well, that's good. We can do some more research on that and do some more digging on that. But even thank you for that story. So, so you became involved. I know that the National Conference of Black Lawyers hosted a conference, and you organized a reparations panel with Chokwe and Imari Obadeli and others at that law conference. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, and then we can go into talking about like how NCOBRA began to come together.
Sure. I said how I began being interested in and working within the reparations movement. I was very active in National Conference of Black Lawyers, and so I would raise it there. And at the conference in 1987, it was the bicentennial of the Constitution. National Conference of Black Lawyers organized a conference in Boston that was focusing on what the Constitution would have said or would have been in it if it were addressing the needs of Black people of African descent. And the assistant director, David Adams, asked me if I would develop a workshop on reparations, which I did. And we had Chokwe Lumumba, Richard America, Imari Obadeli, and Kichi Taifa were panelists. And then we had a response by Henry Richardson, who is a professor. I believe he was at Temple. He may still be at Temple, but I know he was. I think he was at Temple then. And so that's how we got started. It was very well, received, in the sense of people, were energized, I guess you could say, by the discussion. And the rest is history in terms of NCBL's continued involvement in the reparations movement.
Okay. And so we know that NCBL was one of the founding organizations in terms of creating a COBRA. We're working on the narrative, right? So now the narrative is that Queen Mother Dorothy Benton Lewis whispered in Imari Obadeli's ear to. Well,
that's the true narrative. That's the true narrative. The truth comes out, but it was known back then. I mean, it was in the, if people read this chapter I wrote in Ray Winbush's book, it's in that chapter. And Imari, said yes, that was the truth. She actually asked him around the time of the conference. I can't take responsibility for igniting that in her. I'm not sure. I'm sure she had that thought for a while, but she asked Imari to issue the call because she felt, and I think it goes to show two things. One, the issue of gender in our community. I mean,
Right.
a lot of times Black folk want to, say, well, Black folk, we don't have issues with male chauvinism or, Black women not being able to be heard. And then also sometimes it's like it could be something else as well. He was very well, as you know, because he was the president of the Republic of New Africa, he had was held in high esteem, with high respect in the nationalist community.
Yes.
And so that also, I'm sure that was also a factor in her mind as to why she needed to ask him. She felt people would not come out in the kind of numbers she thought we should come out if it was her voice. And so she did ask him, and he did. He issued the call, and that was we had our first meeting. I think it was in September. Almost sure it was in September of 1987 at a union building here in DC, and we met also. And I think in that next year, January, we met in Philly, I believe, and I think we met in New York as well, and then we came. A last couple of meetings. We're back in DC.
And so Queen Mother Dorothy talks to Mario Bedelli. Mario Bedelli puts the official call out for this meeting. And we also know, which we didn't mention yet, which is the Japanese reparations movement was legislation was also happening simultaneously around these years. But so tell us what was like, the call for the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. What was the mission? How did that come together?
Right. Well, we did a lot of, you always think about it on hindsight and you realize, we did a lot of good work. I mean, we did a lot of discussion. Imari's first call said to add it to support the the fight in South Africa, the PAC, and support the armed struggle there. And I believe it was in our first meeting. I'm blanking her name. I can see her just as good. Woman from South Africa. She was from, I think, South Africa or Zimbabwe. I think she was from South Africa, who spoke up and said, no, this should not be about that. This should be totally about just reparations. And that's what a lot of us felt, that, it's not that we, those of us who were sympathetic to the PAC or the ANC or whoever in the South African anti-apartheid struggle shouldn't, do whatever they felt was important for them to do, but that the organization should have as its sole purpose to work for, support efforts for obtaining reparations for Black people of African descent. And at that point, and I don't know if we still are. I know we're probably still not, because I think, we've got Cam's group, United for Reparations, and there may be others that have that sole mission as well. But at that time, we were the only organization that, was the sole purpose. It wasn't like, later on the NAACP came on and supported reparations. Other groups have it in their agenda. The Black Panthers had it in their agenda. We had, but we were the only group at that point in time that the sole mission was reparations. Yeah. So we didn't. It wasn't that the call wasn't issued for the National Council of Black Lawyers. I remember the discussions about the name. Well, what do we name it? And of course, Imari came up with, or I think that was his primary suggestion, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Some of us didn't particularly like in America, but it was a good dialogue. I mean, for me, thinking about it now, talking with you, and have reflected a little bit on it in the past, we really had a good, respectful dialogue going on in all those meetings. There were differences of opinion, but they were differences of opinion. I don't recall, and I don't think I would have blocked it, but maybe I did. I don't recall any like real hostile differences. We just hashed it out, and we hashed it out, and Umari, for example, decided or suggested, and really, if y'all, if I don't know if you knew Imari, but Imari decides, and then you have to push him back off of the decision, right? But that when we do in National Coalition of Blacks for Reparation in America, and I know he thought about it. Imari was brilliant, and he really was a thinker, you know. And he said, and we should have an N apostrophe so that the cobra strikes. We have the cobra striking, And so it's like, okay, Maury. Some of us, again, I wasn't too fond of that. And sometimes I don't put the apostrophe. But that was, it kind of won the day. I think people felt that energy, and that kind of thing. And so it went from there. Kalanje Olusegun, which I believe I know you knew him, and I worked together as the first co-chairs, and he was very much involved, as was I, in all the preparatory meetings and all the development meetings. I remember sitting, we used my office. I was with the ACLU National Prison Project, I think at that time, then 87. Yeah, I think so. And so we use I remember being in our conference room, and, we'd have meetings and have people, developing the bylaws, how we developed the first bylaws of NCOBRA. And so, it was, I still think it was one of the really important steps in our reparations movement. I
Definitely
do.
Definitely. Yeah, I know, and Kichi often mentions that, the nationalists, and Imari specifically, kind of took a step back, I guess is how you would describe it, in terms of not pushing, like everybody call themselves new Africans, or not pushing the line that, in order for you to be, down with reparations, you have to be down with separation, like either Republic of New Africa or Pan-Africanism. But the idea was that if you want, in order for, the mainstream to embrace, the reparations movement, we had to have a place for those people who are not necessarily ready for separation, or not necessarily interested in going to repatriation or being a part of a sovereign nation. And that was like a very tactical move that NCOBRA took in order to be able to bring in other organizations, like you mentioned, mainstream organizations like the Delta Sigma Theta, NAACP, and other organizations that came on board, the National Bar Association, and other organizations that came on board.
We took a conscious position in our deliberations that we needed. I mean, at this point, except for a few of us that weren't, the main advocates that were visible and were involved in advocating for reparations were in the nationalist community. And we took a very, which I don't think NCOBRA always follows it. I know you and I have had some talks about that, but I think that we took a very conscious position and said that we needed to move reparations. And Kichi and I differ on the expression, and I think her expression is probably better, but it's that we needed to expand it. That's pretty much what her expression would be, beyond the nationalist community. We needed to make it a situation where reparations became a household word, where it just wasn't something talked about by those who, even though you might not even have embraced the cultural aspects of being Black, like the dress or the name or the what other kind of interactions, just plain old Black folks that were, focused from a nationalist perspective. That was their political perspective, that we needed to take it beyond that. We needed to take it to people in the NAACP and the Deltas and the national. A friend of mine was on the board of governors with the National Bar Association. He got me on the agenda. We got the National Bar Association to pass a resolution. On and on, that if we were going to succeed, we couldn't just have it lodged in a community that was called, were viewed as nationalists or called nationalists. And nationalists is not to say nationalists had not, they're the ones that had kept the fire burning on it. So it's not a negative on them, but we knew we couldn't win that way. Just like we knew, and you and I have talked some about whites. We know we cannot win reparations without white support. and people who think that, oh, we don't need white folk, da, 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 da. It's crazy. We are not going to win without white support. We've talked about Ida Hakeem, I believe, she started CURE, Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipations. Our first conference, they were there outside the rooms. They were there. They were present. They weren't in the rooms. They weren't in the meetings, but they were good allies because they were conscious of the relationships. And so no, we that's the commitment. And I do think, and I've shared this with others in NCOBRA leadership, so I'm not talking out of school, that we didn't act consciously on that decision. And I think that that's something that I think that despite the fact that I think we didn't act consciously, it is a household word now.
Yes.
It is, and I said here last year, NCOBRA needs to celebrate that, regardless of where NCOBRA ends up. Some are, COBRA is still alive. A lot of organizations formed in 1987, 88 are gone, right?
Yeah.
So, but it may be gone at one point, but at least I think for me, NCOBRA and people who have been active in COBRA, not just the founders, but people like yourself and others who were active and led and built it and all that, I think we need to take a breath and say, wow, look what we've done. Is there still work to be done? Of course. Is there still a critique that can be made? You can make a critique of any organization. No organization is perfect. Somebody show me a perfect organization, and I'm just gonna tell you they lying. Some lying, there's no perfection. Yeah. But I think that what happens, and I'm probably going, I don't know if I'm going beyond right now where you want me to go, but I do think what happens is we're so busy to critique, in a negative way, we don't critique in, wow, what if it hadn't been for NCOBRA? Would we be talking about, would we turn on programs and hear people who don't look anything like us, or who are very straight and, middle of the road, capitalists, that kind of thing, even though they may have our skin coloring, talking about reparations.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I was thinking about a couple of things you said. I was thinking about Ida Hakeem and CURE, and it was a very good organization. They were based here in Atlanta, and so I got to do some work with them. And I remember going on some radio shows with them and sort of like, looking at them. Maybe I was looking at them side eye. I don't know. I probably was. But over time, though, they really earned my respect. Mm-hmm. And I really did, and then look forward to actually being in panels with them in the future in Atlanta. And actually, I feel like it's a real loss that they're not as active as they once were in the reparations space right now. And, there was a lot of good things about that particular formation. And, and I think, in COBRA struggled with, I think the point I don't know how you were going all the way there, was that, there was some conversations, there's been some conversations that have a allied arm of NCOBRA, right? Mm. And that hasn't actually, materialized. And I think that we didn't need it when the CURE was around, actually, like you said. But now I think that may be something that needs to be considered. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, and then also in terms of celebrating in COBRA, I thought it was going to be something that was going to be an annual thing. When Watella organized the the anniversary celebration of the founding of NCOBRA in DC. I attended that. It was a very beautiful experience. And I thought that was going to be kind of like you said, us beginning to celebrate just the work of NCOBRA and the success and track record of NCOBRA. And because, definitely, NCOBRA has been that institution that has kept reparations present. Like you said, moved it from a point. I remember when I joined NCOBRA in 1996, when you said the word reparations, people didn't know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then you'd have to say 40 acres and a mule. And somehow it's interesting to me that in a Black people consciousness, they've heard of 40 acres and a mule. Whether it's Spike Lee or whatever, I don't know. But people, and so then from there you break it down. But then usually the next thing before you can get past 40 acres and a mule is that ain't gonna never happen. Like that, some form of fashion, they would say that very adamantly, very quickly. that, you know, and like we were just pie in the sky, wasting our time having that conversation. And, you know, and that's where a lot of our people were, you know, in the 80s and 90s, you know, and like you said, we in Cobra continue to press into, like you said, now it's a household word, and it's in movies and TV and talk on social media and news and everywhere, on radio shows and things like that. So yeah, we have moved the needle. Oh, okay. I know something I want to let's talk about. Is there anything on reparations before we switch up? Well, this is still related to reparations. So I tell people that at one point in Cobra had the dream team of lawyers working on a reparations lawsuit. We had the famous Johnny Cochran. We had the famous Will Gary. We had Dr. Charles Ogletree. We had Adjoa Aiyetoro. We had other titans in the intellectual space, Cornel West, Leonard Jeffries, and many others, Dr. Marimba Ani and other people. I said we had the dream team, the lawyers that worked on the farmers lawsuit to look at a reparations lawsuit. And I remember you always said, well, we're just doing this to go through the motions because to show our people that we tried the lawsuit. But let's talk a little bit about the you know, some of the legal efforts that NCOBRA made. No, yeah, let's do that. We'll come back to something else. Let's talk about that since I've brought that up now.
Well, one of the things that we did, well, I think it's two things I want to share. One is that we did form NCOBRA formed a Reparations Legal Strategies Commission, and part of the work of that commission was to look at the bringing a lawsuit around reparations. We knew from past cases like Cato v. the United States, which was one of the first cases in the modern era. I think it was, I forget, 91 or something like that. That, you know, you can't just, well, we knew it from, some of us knew it from just our own practice of law, but you couldn't just sue the United States government and say, give me reparations. So we struggled over the various things of how we can get into court. We came up with a lawsuit that we thought would be successful, in fact. But one of the concerns that we had, and some of us, and I count me among them, probably a little more conservative, was having the money to do it, because what the government would do, or any private, we were going to sue around the crack powder cocaine. And what we did was we worked on it. We did have a group of people that had been sentenced to the harsher punishments because of crack. Crack sentencing was harsher than powder cocaine. We had pulled it together, but what we decided, and that's when we organized around that time, created LEDREF, which was a legal defense God, I forget what an education fund, and to raise money, 501c3, for the lawsuit and other things, of course, but for the lawsuit primarily. Barbara Hannibal was, at that point, I believe he was either chair of our Legal Strategies Commission, or he was chair of NCOBRA, I can't remember, but he was in the leadership. And then following him was Mashiriki. And so our goal was to raise money so that we could support the lawsuit. And I think part of it, and I can say that now, years later, that I think part of the concern is just filing it and not having money to support it would have been worse to us, to some of us, than not doing it at all. And you saw the result. No law school has made it past, you know, it's, you know, the other than Belinda's petition back in 1782. I can't think of one that has made it past motions to dismiss. But we knew that paper, and I guess part of it, I'm starting to say something, I start saying something else. But I was working with I think at that point I was with the National Prison Project. I knew how much those cases cost, and I knew that case was going to be even more than what the cases where we were working on in ACLU. And ACLU had a good funding; they get funding, and we got lawyers' fees when we won. So, what the government does, and we were going to sue the government, they paper you to death. And I don't know if your audience knows what that means, but they send you motion after motion after motion, and they do this and they do that, which causes you to have to, always be expending time and energy. So I'm saying that is full disclosure. I don't know if we've talked to some about it, a couple of us about it in the past, as to why no lawsuit was filed. We didn't raise the money. We didn't raise the money for it. And to me, if I don't know about you, but or the audience, but to me, you don't get into a fight unless you know you got some chance of standing up and throwing a few licks.
Right. So you mentioned that you can't sue the government. You mentioned the reasons why.
Well, you just can't sue the U.S. government. It's sovereign immunity. It's the theory of sovereignty. That's not the theory. It's a legal principle of sovereign immunity, where, of course, the sovereign, the U.S., can't protect themselves from lawsuit. And then they have the tort claims, the Federal Tort Claims Act, and then some states have the same thing. You can't sue the states either, straight on for money. And so you can't, unless they waive their right under the Tort Claims Act. So.
And then you got statute of limitations.
Yeah, you have all of that, statute of limitations, all that. But so we could get around that with that lawsuit because they were still putting folk in jail. I mean, we just but yeah, you have. I'm doing and I'll, like I told you earlier, I'll send you when we post it. But we did get some funding in NCBL, National Council of Black Lawyers, to do a reparations research project. And we've been working since March on it. And that project is to really help task forces and commissions and other groups organize reparations, but the focus would be on task forces and commissions to help them work through what are some of the things that they need to know or do in order to be successful or have a good chance of being successful. And one of the we have 8. I know this really good well now because we're just about finished with the last edits of what we call the handbook. I was going to say we, but no, I was very emphatic that it couldn't be long because people don't read long. We got people who have 100, 200 page toolkits online, all of that. People don't read that. And so ours is maybe, depending on the size paper it's printed on, once we print it, it'll be about 65 pages. But the sections are short. So we have a section on what we found, Jamoki, was that in talking to people who are currently in the reparations movement, many people don't know the history of reparations. They just, they're in it and they support it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not questioning their sincerity, but they don't know about the history of reparations. They don't know about Belinda's petition or Queen Mother Audley Moore even. And, many of us think, what? You don't know about Queen Mother Audley Moore? And so they don't know that. So we have a section on the history of reparations. We have a section on the issues around the law, the race-specific remedies, what the court said, what can you do, how can you develop something that might, stand up if it's attacked. Everything's not challenged, but, we know now currently, especially there are groups, white groups that are attacking reparations proposals and programs in various areas. So like Judicial Watch, I think is the name of it, that's sued in Evanston. So we have a section on that. We have a section on what you were talking about earlier, which we may talk more about eligibility, talking about the various positions on eligibility, descendant of enslaved African, whatever. Those is several of them, like just plain all African, all Black, Black folk of African descent, and all the other iterations of that. We have a section on buy-in. One of the things that our team, we were able to hire part-time people, law students, and one just graduated in May, and then a part-time staff attorney. And we talked about that with some of the commissions, that how do we get people in the community to buy into reparations, to say that, to support it, because we know legislative bodies act based on what they view their constituency wants them to do. So we have a section on that. We have a section on international reparations movement and its interconnection. And Imari, in fact, we have a quote ending with a quote from Imari about the importance of internationalizing our movement. We have a section on self-care. Our staff attorney said, well, I think, we're doing all of this, but we really need to write a section on self-care, because so many activists, we get so in to the work, and we've done it all of our lives, so to speak, of whether it was reparations or whatever it was, and you don't take care of yourself. You don't exercise, you don't eat right, you don't get rest. And so we have, that's our last, it was the last section. I just finished doing the edit on that just earlier today. And I used Damu, my friend Damu Smith. You remember him?
I remember him.
I used him as an example.
Yeah.
I used him as an example, and so I'm excited about it, as you could probably hear in my voice. I think, and I really always respect your view, because I know you give it to me whether it's good or bad, So, but I like people like that. I do. I try and be that person. I do. I like people. Yeah, this is probably not to be on the podcast, but don't you get irritated with people who, just saying it because they know that that's what you want to hear?
Right.
As opposed to being truthful. So I would really appreciate your feedback on it. We plan to post everything by the 10th of October on NCBL's website. And we're getting money we're applying for money so that we're able to print the handbook, but it will be readable on the site. You won't be able to download it, but you can read it.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah, that's good work, bringing this up current in terms of how, we can be moving, I guess. And maybe kind of segue to another question I had, which is, how do you think that the role of lawyers is important in our social justice movement, and particularly in the reparations movement? And you just gave one example already.
I think that, well, first of all, my bias is that I think all of us are important with the different skills that we bring to the table, whether they're a lawyer, or doctor, or, you have secretarial skills or whatever. So I want to first start with that, because I think sometimes it's true even in our communities, non-movement communities, but it's true in our movement communities too. We somehow give more umbrage maybe, or to someone who has a degree, so to, a law degree, or, I remember one time I was talking to somebody, and it was in the movement. And we were just talking, it was a guy, I can't remember his name, nor would I say it on, I have grown, I would not say the name publicly. But, we were talking or something, and it wasn't any big deal. And then somebody asked me a question. He may ask me a question, and I said something about, well, I'm a lawyer. And he said, oh, you're a lawyer. And then his whole treatment of me changed, for the positive. Not that he was bad before, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I'm just saying, it's like, come on, guy, But I do think that part of the issue for our movement is that we do need, and that's why we did it in the handbook, and it still needs to be discussed. I mean, I think people probably want to, that's one of the things we're proposing for this additional money, is to be able to go to commissions and talk with people about it. How do you develop a program proposal for the legislature that has a chance of, because we know what courts do. I mean, none of us are naive. Well, some of us might be. You can have, I have lost at least one case that I knew daggone well I should have won. I mean, the judge was wrong, and so we know that happens. So we have to say may, But I think of lawyers who are, uh, I think you have to have lawyers that are knowledgeable, that are committed to supporting the movement, not necessarily having to be deep in the movement. But those are the kind of people, because then you need people who will sit through and really work through some of the legal issues that the commission or task force or community group may face if they are attempting to push something. We also know that there are people in the community who the first thing they want to do is sue. Well, let's sue. Well, if you get some lawyers, again, the same kind of description of people who were supportive and all of that, but can talk you through, is that really the best route? What would you need if you're going to do that? That kind of thing. So I think that's the importance of lawyers, because so much of what we do is you're confronting a legal system.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I always say that, working within the system in the United States is really challenging because, if you get a victory, say at the federal level, oftentimes it'll get undercut at the state level or at the city level, or if you get a victory at the city level, it could get undermined at the state level or at the federal level. And then if none of that works, it gets undermined in the courts, which we're seeing a whole lot of that now, right? I've been saying this for years, and so that's, one of the challenges. And I was also thinking about Michelle Alexander, who in her book, The New Jim Crow, she was talking about how she feels that the movement kind of shifted from a lot of organizing and mobilizing to more legal and litigious aspects of the movement, which she think, if I remember, she thought that was not necessarily so good, that the movement had moved that way, and but then, on the other side of that, like you said, because we do find ourselves in a world that deals with lawsuits and legal standing, like you mentioned, Judicial Watch suing Evanston's reparations, right? That we do need to have, lawyers who are committed and conscious to work in that space and support this work.
I think you need both. I think that the issue is sometimes people think it's either or. I
Right.
think we have to work and build a strong movement. We include in our handbook, but we've all said it. Frederick Douglass saying, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." And I think we have to realize that. And so I think you have to have the people who have the legal knowledge and skills, that if that's a route that makes sense to take, you can take it. But that's not without the mass movement or the grassroots movement or the whatever you want to call it, because that doesn't help. It's not going to be successful. It has to be a strategy that includes both. Uh, the one thing I think, and you mentioned this earlier, is I think we need to develop ways in which to convince people that fighting for reparations is worth it. And the argument that, well, we'll never get it. Well, no, you won't get it if you don't demand it. Number one,
Right.
you're not going to turn and say, "Oh yeah, no, we did y'all so wrong." It is. So you won't get it if you don't demand it. But for me, and I remember we had the conference. I don't know if you were in Cobra then, back in South Carolina many, many years ago. We went to a plantation, and you went into where the uh, enslaved Africans were living and stuff. And I just remember saying, we have to, and I used the word, I believe, I can't remember it back then, it was years ago. We have to avenge our ancestors.
Yes.
And avenge, I don't mean physically, but to me, if we don't speak it, if we don't demand it, it's not just our ancestors, because we're injured too. Don't get me wrong. I believe that. I mean, I don't believe we're doing it reparations is just for what happened back then.
Right.
That's why we talk about the legacies or vestiges of slavery. It continues to happen. But for me, I would rather you say, if this body makes its transition, I would rather you be able to say about me that she believed in reparations and she fought for reparations in whatever capacity. Fought that, different people have different skills, different, and all of that. That I was, to me, yes, I want it. I can't say it doesn't matter if we don't get it. But to me, number one, you're not going to get it if you don't demand it, and you don't keep increasing the numbers of the people who are demanding it. But I can sleep pretty good at night knowing that I'm upholding the righteous, just act. This is justice. This is justice writ large. This is not about black or white or, in that narrow sense. It is about black and white in a broad sense. It's about white supremacy. It's about the self-made racial hierarchy, the hierarchy that's why critical race theorists call race a social construction. They created this hierarchy that said whites, Caucasians were the highest and the most da 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 da, and at the very bottom were the darker skinned people, and at the very bottom were African people. And it's created. And it's, as I wrote in an article in 2023, I think it was published in 2022, this racial hierarchy and this that actually is the baby, or not the baby, is the creator, the parent of white supremacy or white superiority, is in fact in the bones of not just the United States. So that's where we are here, right? In the bones of the United States. But it was created. It's not something that's a truism, I guess is what I'm saying. I was trying to think of the word. It's not a truism, it's created. And it's not just white people who embrace it. Many of us embrace it.
Yeah, that's true.
Many of us embrace it. Many of us think we're not as good as white people are, and you also get other groups of color that some will align with us. I'm not saying that's not. Some the Japanese Americans, we have a strong group that are aligning with NCOBRA and the reparations movement. We have strong group of relationships with Native Americans, and I know that's something Chokwe did a lot in Mississippi to get alliance and aligned with the Native groups, indigenous peoples groups. But we have some that will say, well, I won't be with you because you ain't as good as them. And so I'll be with them, and I'm saying that lightly, but we know that's true. But it's in the bones, it's created. We have to realize that. And how do we uncreate it? We uncreate it by doing what we do, by talking about it, by examining it, by being truthful about it, by, I had experience people assuming that I wasn't a lawyer in Richmond, Virginia court. Oh, you must be a paralegal. I forget the exact words, but that's it. That was it. So, having to assert myself to make it clear, and that's not because I think paralegals are less than I am, but the assumption that a Black woman, and I was way young then, didn't even have these gray hairs, wasn't a lawyer. That was the assumption. And they make assumptions about us all the time. And they make negative assumptions about us. They make negative assumptions that we are thieves, that we are the Black women or whores, all of that, all of the stereotypic thinking. And that's part of this created mess in order to uphold white supremacy. So I'm get down off my.
Well, no, we appreciate that, and I think that's we can move from that to discussing. I heard you and Nkichi when you all did your testimony for the California Reparations Task Force, and you were very passionate in terms of asserting your opinion on how they should move forward with eligibility and all of that. So why don't you share a little bit about that, your position on that you shared with the California Task Force?
You know how long ago that was? I know you do because you just listened to it. You told me. Well, let me share it this way, and then you can always interrupt me if I'm not going where you want me to go. One of the things that happened in the California Task Force was that you could go on, they had these public hearings and they advertised them and they sent you how to get into them and all of that. And you could go on and let's say it started at 9 o'clock their time. If you went on at 8:45, you might have been number 100 speaker, right? Because people, number one, people wanted to talk. But one of the things that we found, and I've seen it in other settings as well, but particularly this is, and heard about in other settings, is we have this group called ADOS, and it stands for American Descendants of Slaves, that has this view that the people who should receive reparations are descendants of, and they don't say enslaved Africans, they say descendants of American slaves, right? And but they have the view, as I've shared, they have this view. It's not the view that is problematic, it's how they close out or attempt to close out the expression of any opposing view, the expression of any analysis where someone may not be buying the view and willing and wants to talk through it, but they aren't willing to do that. So it's a very, that's part of that climate was in that hearing, that they, would get there, they get on the list, and like, everybody be saying the same thing. So all of them get on the list. And so you might be, you on there 50th person or 35th person or 100th person. The thing I want to say, and we put it in the handbook I was telling you about, do an analysis of it, is for two things about it. The view, the reason I oppose the view that people who should take, or should, and I'm using the legal language, let me say, people who should get reparations, or people who are descended from enslaved Africans. I oppose that view, and we write about it. And I'm not the only one, but I'm taking ownership. I don't want to put nobody else's name up here at this point. I oppose that view because, first of all, the people who were injured by slavery are more than enslaved Africans. Number one, they may have had the biggest hit on them. But if we think about, and I think, and if I'm not incorrect, Jamoke, I talked about the so-called free Africans during slavery. Well, they were restricted too. They may not have been enslaved in the same way and didn't have this as restricted a movement or be as susceptible to the beatings and all of that. I'm not trying to make the life of an enslaved African look like it wasn't harsh, but also there was a level of harshness just being Black in that society, whether or not you were so-called owned by someone or not. So to me, if you're going to repair Black people, you have to repair Black people for the injuries that have been suffered because we are Black people of African descent that were have been brutalized and treated as, some people would call us second-class citizens. In many instances during slavery, we weren't treated as citizens, period. We know that. We didn't become citizens. And I know the Republic of New Africa and Kishi voices says all the time, had an objection to all of a sudden the 14th Amendment just saying we're citizens, that there was no forum for us to discuss whether or not we wanted to be citizens or giving options and that kind of thing. But I'm against that. I'm against I oppose. I don't think that the resolution to the eligibility question lies in descendancy from enslaved Africans, even though I am a descendant of enslaved Africans. So I'm not, I can't say I'm, some people might argue against it who aren't now protecting their own interests. I don't know. But I do know it just doesn't make sense to me because we need to repair, though, the injured group, and the injured group were Black people of African descent. We look at, and I'll say this one last example, in addition to looking at the treatment and of so-called free Africans, and James Turner and David Walker's appeal, the reprinted by Black Classic Press, he did an introduction and he puts free in quotes. And he said, because under a system of oppression that we continue to live on, Nobody, no black person was free, really, So, but then we look at people like Diallo, Abdou Diallo, isn't this?
Mhm.
Shot 41, 42 times in the back by New York police. They didn't stop and say, now, before we shoot you, we want to know if you were a descendant of an enslaved African in America. No, that the injury is broader and bigger than our descendancy from slavery. Not that slavery wasn't awful. I'm not one that wants to dismiss that. That is part of the injury. But the injury is broader than that, it's bigger than that. The last point I would want to make that we make in the handbook is having that eligibility criteria is divisive among our own community. Why? We're doing a Euro thing, a white thing, setting up, oh, you better than me because you it is, or you worse than me. No. Not, can there be some differences in the form of reparations? Maybe, yeah. I'm not saying there shouldn't be. If there's a reparations given or cash payment or whatever given for people who are descendants of enslaved Africans, and that computes to their lost inheritance, or computes to the lost wages. I mean, we have Richard America and many other black economists have developed formulas to talk about how much was actually the cost of the stolen labor. That could be done, but that's not the only form reparation should take. And the last thing I said, a few minutes ago, didn't I? The last thing is, some of the Margadarity argues that we need the reparation should go a cash payment. It should be cash payment. It should only go the descendants of enslaved Africans. And then in the next breath says, and I watched this on the video too, so that's why I can say in the next breath, they talks about closing the wealth gap, the black-white wealth gap. Ain't no way you gonna close the black-white health gap, but just giving a check to a descendant of an enslaved African. That don't even take anybody with any kind of degree or anything to know that. And I'm not disrespecting Darity at all, but that's not a good argument. It's just
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. So that's it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things I think that people don't make the distinction is what is wealth. There's a difference between income and wealth. So the white people have income that's being generated through stocks, bonds, land, or whatever, that gives them a much higher wealth than what we have. And so if you give someone a check, unless that's in some investment form, that doesn't replace the wealth that's being generated, that comes in on a regular basis based on the investments that they have. And so that's another reason why that's so problematic. But the time just slipped on me. I was looking, I thought we had some time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was getting ready to play a clip from your, we're going to play it anyway.
Okay.
But one of the things that you emphasized was that, basically that reparations is also for the injury that happened after the enslavement period. And I think that was really important.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to play a little snippet from what you said during the California your California
get started, which I'm sure you're not doing, but my passion for it and my concern is all the work we have done in Kichi, even before I joined in the mid 80s, and others she lifted up. We cannot cheat the ancestors, deny our children and those children to come the right to know the full scope of injury. And then then reparations can be prioritized, would be my suggestion, based on what has to be done now and what doesn't have to be done now. And there are other ways of doing it. For example, in Maryland, they're doing
yeah. I like the disservice to the ancestors. That really resonated with me. I was like, get them, Mama Adjoa. So so we'll just you give us some closing remarks or whatever you would like to share, and we're going to wrap this show up. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you for asking me. Accepting eldership is a mental process, because I think that we all, I don't know about we all, but many of us don't even think about being an elder until all of a sudden somebody says you're an elder. And then the first thing you do is say, what do you mean? I'm an elder. And then you realize, well, yeah, you are elder, you know. So, but I really respect and appreciate you're wanting me to be on your series of elders, because I've embraced it. I mean, you can't help but embrace it, or if you fight it, then you know, whatever. And I also think that in closing, I think that I would like to say to whoever is listening, because I know you're doing it, I think that we just have to continue to work together. Those of us who are committed to getting reparations, to look at where we are, to assess it, what are other strategies we may need to embrace or not. I believe reparations is a critical demand, because it sits at the foundation of justice for Black people. But I think, as we talked about Cure, you know, the white allies and others, I really think that if we think broadly, that you can't have a society that is good for anybody if that society is based in oppression of anybody. So that obtaining reparations, developing of reparations proposals, I think actually is good, not just for Black people of African descent, but for everybody in the United States or in the worldwide movement.
All right. Thank you
Thank
again,
you.
Attorney. It's been a very good conversation. I'm Adjoa Aiyetoro, and you've been listening to Reparations Now podcast with our special guest and elder, Mama Adjoa Aiyetoro, Attorney Adjoa Aiyetoro, founding member of NCOBRA, Deep Legacy, and the Reparations movement, continue to be active even today. And so we ask you to continue to support this show. Tell your friends, share, like, and subscribe. And reparations now, reparations now, reparations now.